So the college football rankings are out, and finally, they got it right with putting Georgia number 1. We got Georgia number 1, Ohio State 2, Michigan 3, Florida State 4. Those are your 4 teams that are in. Obviously, we know this is not going to stay that way. Hence, one reason for that is because Ohio State and Michigan are going to play each other, and one of those guys are going to get knocked out. But Cricket, we've talked about this a lot. We've said Georgia is the best team in the country until they slip up. They deserve that number 1 spot. Maybe this is where they relax now that they regained it. All they did was add fuel to the fire for Georgia here. But the worst case scenario for the playoff committee is still alive, right? So here it is. You ready for it? Because I don't know what the fuck they do in this scenario.
Lay it on me, man.
Okay. Big Ten champion, undefeated. Whether it's Ohio State or Michigan, they're in, right?
Yep.
Florida State, undefeated. They're in, right? ACC champ.
Yep.
Let's say UW somehow wins this week and also beats Oregon in the Pac-12 championship, and they're undefeated. They're clearly in, right?
Whoa, you're forgetting. What if they lose to your Cougs?
Once again, if UW wins out, Pac-12 undefeated Pac-12 champ. By the way, there hasn't been a Pac-12 champ ever. The last time there's been an undefeated Pac-12, or there hasn't been an undefeated Pac-12 champ.
Okay, I was like, wait a minute, what do you mean?
The last time there was an undefeated Pac-12 champion was the Pac-10 in 2010.
Wow.
Just so you know. Yeah.
Which means it's not happening this year either.
It's not. But let's say somehow UW wins out. They're in, right? So you got UW, you got Florida State, and you got the Big Ten champ. There's one spot left, Cricket.
Winner of the SEC
one spot left. And let's say Alabama beats Georgia, the number 1 team by the committee in the country, beats Georgia. It doesn't matter how they beat them, they beat them. Doesn't matter if they win by 50 or they win by 1, right? They beat them. They're the SEC champs. 1-loss SEC champs. How do you leave the 1-loss SEC champs out of the college football playoff, Cricket? Can you do it?
I don't think so, man.
But what if I told you?
I know.
But what if I told you Texas wins the Big 12 and they're 1-loss Big 12 champ? And you're like, okay, but the SEC means more, right? Is that the slogan? It just means more.
I mean, yeah, it's going to be hard for a conference that pretty much year in and year out is always up there in the talk for top 2 conferences. It may not. There's not years that it's always the best conference, but they're not going to leave a 1-loss SEC champ, especially when it's Alabama or Georgia. They're just not going to do that. They're not.
Yeah, but let's tell some people why this is a terrible scenario for the committee, because for those of you that don't know, Alabama's 1 loss was to Texas
at home,
and it was at their house, and it wasn't even fucking close. Texas beat the shit out of them. Now it was week 2. I argue that was week 2. We're a different part of this season. What have you done for me lately? All right. Yep. And if you go in, and the best win this season, by the way, in college football is Texas going to Alabama and beating Alabama. That is the best college football win. But I would argue if Alabama goes into, which is basically a home game for Georgia, right? Yeah. If they go into the SEC championship game and they beat Georgia, that is now the best win in college football. And the college football playoff committee is telling you this because they put Georgia number 1. So that's why I think if that scenario plays out, I think Alabama gets in over Texas and people are going to shit their fucking pants over it. And that's why we're going to a 12-team playoff.
I agree. I agree. And you're going to look at the overall body of work in this thing and decide that Alabama's is ultimately better based on the competition stuff. Texas has won a couple close games. The Kansas State game, I can let them slide. Kansas State's a pretty good football team. The Houston game, where you're up by 3 touchdowns and you let them climb all the way back in that thing, you have to sweat it all the way down to win by a touchdown or whatever. They're going to look at games like that and say, Alabama's not doing this. And when you're making the decision for who the 4th team or whatever is going to be, you have to decide which team is unequivocally better. That's their term that they use. And I think it's going to be real hard pressed to find anybody that's going to say at that point in time, especially if Alabama has beaten Georgia now and sitting there as the SEC champion and their overall body of work, even with that loss to Texas, they're going to sit and say Alabama is the best team of the 2.
Now, what's more likely to happen? So that's the nightmare scenario for the committee.
That's chaos theory.
Yeah. The more likely thing that's going to happen is, I think we both agree, and there's a reason why they're huge favorites. I think Oregon's going to beat UW. I think UW slips up, but even if they don't slip up, I think Oregon's going to get the rematch, and they're going to beat UW in the Pac-12 championship. So you're going to have a 1-loss Oregon team, you're going to have a 1-loss Texas team, and a 1-loss potentially Alabama team. right?
Or a one loss. Yeah, I mean the Georgia. I think
Georgia wouldn't be one loss. Georgia wouldn't have a loss. Georgia undefeated, they're in, right? So
yeah, they're in. But if they had a loss, they wouldn't have conference championship. So you can pretty much axe them if that's the case.
So let's say you have Georgia undefeated, they're in. You have Florida State undefeated, they're in. You have a Big Ten champ, they're probably in. So then it's going to come down to Texas and Oregon. And I swear to God, if the fucking Pac-12 gets left out this year after the year they've had, I'm going to be so pissed.
Undefeated.
If they put they would put Texas in over Oregon.
Maybe you got a common opponent there in Texas Tech, which you would have to look and see how that. I mean that's one of the parameters they use. That's a bad one to look at.
It is bad, but also Oregon went to Texas Tech, and I think Texas gets to play Texas Tech at home. So I mean it's different, and it's also like once again we go back to the time of the season. That was early in the season. This is late in the season. It's different teams, different like your team is not the same team at the beginning. Look at my fucking Cougs, dude. You look at my Cougs, they were ranked at one point.
Well,
look at Colorado, they were ranked at one point.
There's still a few weeks left and a few weeks of hard football, some rivalry games, things like that. You have to make sure these teams, the reason they got there, let's just say, I'm not even going to say a team because I don't want to wish bad juju on nobody, but let's just say one of these top teams starting quarterback goes down. And, that they're going to look, the committee's going to look at that and be like, well, this is obviously not the same team that they were with this guy. So you got to wait and see and make sure. There's so many things. I know we're only a few weeks away, but there's still so many different moving variables that can change this thing up completely. And I don't know. We're going to have to see how it plays out. Some of it will handle itself, but I think Texas is the one right now sitting there having to sweat the most of all these teams.
I think the committee is praying that Florida State somehow fucks up. They're not gonna, but I think that would answer that would solve all their problems. Florida State loses one to some team that they're not supposed to.
They could too. They got that rivalry game with the Gators. I mean, I know the Gators are not a good football team, but it's a rivalry game. Crazy things happen. And, that could be a spot where, Florida matches up pretty decently with them as far as a massive offensive and defensive line, things like that. Florida can really control the tempo running the football if they get a little bit of a rhythm there. And that's something that could give Florida State some trouble. So that's a spot they could lose, but that's what the committee's praying for.
Step says you put the conference champ in. They would all be conference champs. So Oregon would be a conference champ. Texas would be a big. That's the only way. If Texas loses one more, they're not getting in.
Yeah. I mean, if anybody be on with more than one loss, you're not even in the conversation at this point. You're just not.
Even with our first scenario with Alabama and Texas, they would both be conference champs. It's crazy, dude. I love this chaos because it gives us something to talk about, and it gets people riled up and gets people pissed off because fans are fanatics. And so let me know what you guys think in the comments below on this video. How do you think this is going to play out? And then in these scenarios, who do you think gets in? Who are your four? Who do you think? Not who do you think deserves it? Not who you think should get in. I mean, you can give me that too, but let me know at the end of the day, who's going to be our four finalists in this college football playoff. Comment below, like this video, subscribe out there, come over to sportspicks.locals.com, and we'll catch you guys on the next video.